Welcome to my presentation on the Art of Intarsia and my own variation of it that I call Intarsia glass. This is where I combine stained glass with Intarsia. I've been doing this since 1999 and I've never found anyone that beat me to it, so I claim to have invented the technique. Intarsia is the art of creating three-dimensional appearing pictures on a flat panel out of materials such as solid wood, glass, or stone. Early Intarsia tended to be primarily geometric and tile patterns. The art was developed by the Arabs in the 7th century and carried from Egypt to Europe by missionaries. Figurative Intarsia first appeared at the Cathedral of Orvieto in Siena, Italy in 1330. It primarily depicted animals, people, and natural themes. Intarsia peaked in the 15th and 16th centuries after spreading to Germany and then being introduced to London by Flemish artists. Its primary use during this period was in elaborate cabinetry, which was a symbol of great wealth. It fell out of favor around 1620 when the art of marquetry gradually replaced it. Marquetry is using veneers to create pictures on flat panels instead of using solid wood. Judy Gale Roberts began her career under her father's tutelage by installing large-scale wooden artwork in Texas. She later moved to Florida where she developed her expertise in smaller decorative intarsia. Most modern intarsia is fastened together by gluing it to a thin plywood backing. The method I use is to edge glue it without a backing. So what tools are needed to create intarsia? Well, as Tim the Toolman Taylor says, well, the first thing you need is a good solid workbench. A scroll saw is recommended by most teachers. It can cut very fine lines. I prefer a bandsaw with a 1/8 inch scrolling blade. It's much faster than a scroll saw, but requires much more practice to gain acceptable accuracy of cuts. An oscillating spindle sander is needed to smooth out edges and create vertical surfaces. Vertical edges are essential when edge gluing pieces. A flap sander is invaluable for smoothing rounded pieces and removing tool marks. Every shop needs clamps, but I find the most valuable clamp for intarsia is painter's tape. After gluing the edges, I tape the top of one piece, bridge the joint, and pull the tape taut over the adjoining piece to provide the necessary pressure on the glue joint. After it's glued together, you finally get to the finishing stage. Most of my pieces are sprayed or hand brushed after assembly. Small to medium paint brushes are desirable. So let's make something. The first thing you need is a pattern. You can either buy patterns from some source or make your own patterns from photographs or from your imagination. All of my patterns are homemade. Here are 3 patterns that I have developed. The first one is a simple cartoon of a sheep. The second one is a bugling elk that I made from a photograph. The third one is the Boston Light that I also made from a photograph. As I said earlier, most intarsia is done to be hung on a wall and only viewed from one side, but it occurred to me if you can do it in 2D, why can't you do it in 3D? Here we're going to make a 3D heron. The body will be the first piece to cut. Normally it is white, but for discussion of grain characteristics, I'm using red oak here for demonstration purposes. The first step is to transfer your pattern to the workpiece. Carbon paper transfer is illustrated here. Some people use adhesive clear plastic sheets that have had the pattern traced with a marker. Templates made of rigid plastic, masonite, or plywood are useful if a large number of the same item will be made. Paper cutouts work well when very large creations are being made. In Intarsia, it's important that the grain of the wood follow the natural flow of the piece you're creating. Here you can see I've laid out arrows on the pattern pieces to show how they should line up with the wood when you trace the piece. I usually figure that I waste between 1/3 and 1/2 of the wood I buy simply because I'm trying to make the grain flow in the proper direction. Another art called segmentation doesn't pay attention to the grain because they just lay the whole pattern out on the board, cut it out, and then glue the pieces back together. The pieces are usually painted covering all the grain, so the direction isn't important. Here I've switched back to cutting the wood out of a piece of aspen because I wanted the bird to be white. I only used the oak just to demonstrate the grain direction. For the first piece, just cut along the lines. Complete accuracy is not critical at this point. Saws will leave burrs along the bottom of the edge of a cut. These burrs and sawtooth marks need to be removed before you move on to the next pieces. Sand the edges smooth to remove the burrs and tool marks and create a vertical edge. Vertical edges are critical when edge gluing Intarsia pieces. The sanded edge will leave a nice smooth vertical surface to join with the next piece. Choose the next piece to avoid leaving tight interior angles for succeeding pieces. By choosing the piece marked with an X, the next piece above it will have a smooth, gentle curve match. If we chose the piece without the X for the next piece, we would leave the X piece with a tight, difficult to match pair of joining edges. Here we're laying out the next piece on a piece of cherry that will be the lower wing of the heron. Trace all lines except the line that is common with the previously cut piece with your carbon paper method. Make index marks where the new lines intersect the common line between that piece and the new piece. We must be aware that when we round off the edges of these pieces, the grain direction will change somewhat. We now take the piece that we've previously cut and smoothed, line it up with the index marks on the new pattern piece on the piece of cherry, and then use the line of that to draw the next pattern line on the piece of cherry, and that way the pieces will match closely. You can see here how the matching pattern line is drawn on the new piece of wood. We're going to switch to stained glass pattern techniques for just a moment in order to discuss the paper cutout pattern techniques when dealing with large patterns. With large constructs, it helps to build them on top of the original cartoon in order to keep the edges of the creation straight and square, whether they are Intarsia or stained glass. Therefore, the working pattern layout is a little different. This is a piece I recently completed for our front door. Patterns for new pieces are traced onto a piece of paper that is slid underneath the working object and on top of the cartoon. It's then traced onto that and used as a paper cutout. Cut the pattern piece out of the paper, add information as necessary such as grain direction and in this case an indication of what the tip and the stem of the leaf was. Fasten it on top of the stock with a glue stick in the case of stained glass, and proceed to cut. Cut out the new piece, test fit it to make necessary adjustments to fit, and then proceed on to your next pieces. We're now returning back to the heron, where we used the other piece that was already cut to make the matching line. We must cut on the outside of that matching line on our new piece. That's how it's going to match. The other lines that were done by carbon paper aren't as critical at this point. Sand all of your edges and be especially careful with your new matching edge. After the new piece is cut out, hold it against the pre-existing piece to check for fit. Carefully sand away high spots a little at a time so that you don't see any light between the two pieces. After you have sanded the pieces so that they fit tightly, tape them together with masking tape as they will fit in the finished piece. These will be used to make the match lines for your new pieces. We're now going to make the upper wing out of that same piece of cherry. Lay out the pattern as described earlier for matching pieces in the carbon paper lines. Here you can see the match line on the new piece being added. The two original cut pieces are taped together and laid on top of it to create that line. The crest of the heron is made out of wenge, which is a dark wood, and a pencil line doesn't show. So in order to make that work, I cover it with a piece of light masking tape and then trace the line onto the masking tape and use that for my cut line. The eyes of the heron will be made by drilling a 1/8 inch hole through the body of the bird at this point. Later, a 1/8 inch dowel will be added after the head is shaped, and the ends of the dowel will be burnt to add black to the eyes. Well-made intarsia gives the illusion of 3 dimensions in a relatively flat surface, similar to bas-relief carving. This is done by lowering the edges of one piece of 2 adjoining pieces while leaving the edge of the other piece higher to create the illusion of depth. Most intarsia is designed to be hung on a wall, so the front surface is the only surface that is treated in this manner. In the case of the heron, it will be seen from all sides, so both faces of the intarsia will be sculpted in this manner. Full 3D intarsia provides an opportunity to be more creative in removal of excess material. The illustration on the left shows preparation of the body by drawing lines to indicate material to be removed so the neck has a more natural profile. Excess material is then removed to begin the shaping process. Here the initial removal is being done with a bandsaw. The edges that will form the belly, neck, back, etc. and are not matching edges with another piece are rounded off to give a full body effect. Here it is being done on the spindle sander by sliding the workpiece back and forth and gradually rolling it against the spindle as material is sanded away. Many intarsians use inflatable drum sanders to accomplish this. Here you can see in the left-hand picture that the body contours of the bird have been rounded off where they're fully exposed. The profile of the lower wing has been lowered to give the upper wing more relief. In the right-hand picture, you can see where the back and the upper wing have been also rounded off to give it a more natural appearance. Now we're on to the final sanding. I use a brush-backed flap sander where each piece of sandpaper in the wheel is backed by a stiff bristle brush. It helps, I think, to smooth it out more so than other flap sanders. Interior tight finishes still have to be done by hand. Okay, let's put it together. Glue the pieces together by edge gluing them. I hold them together with blue painter's tape until the glue has set. add features that are necessary to complete the project. You'll see in a couple of slides where I added a base, legs, and some cattails. Apply your desired finish. I usually use either lacquer or polyurethane, and it can be either sprayed on or brushed on. At the start of this video, I referred to my Intarsia glass technique. This is one of the earliest pieces I did. I call this one Fisherman's Delight. A lot of these pieces are designed to be hung in a window, although they look pretty good without it. You can see, though, that the window behind the water on the trout certainly brightens the piece. Most of my pieces are framed, but they don't have to be. This is a variation of my Intarsia glass. I call it layered Intarsia. The hills and Mount Fuji in the background are one layer, and the tree is layered on top of that in the foreground. Another approach is freestanding Intarsia. The frame on this is actually thick enough that it doesn't hang on a wall or in a window. It stands up by itself. Simple Intarsia combined with mosaic glass makes for nice door signs. I made this set about 45 years ago when I first got into doing Intarsia. Today, the pieces would be much more rounded than they are then. I've made and sold about 50 of these sets. Sanctuary is actually a variation of a commercial pattern. The raccoon up a tree is a Judy Gale Roberts pattern. It was made as a flat wall hanging, so I added a backside to the raccoon, turned it into 3D and put him up a tree. And then I decided if you have a raccoon up a tree, you have to have a coon dog that chased him there. So I found the picture of a walker hound on the internet and turned that into a pattern, and then turned the whole thing into a lamp. Serenity is another version of an Intarsia that I added a Zen garden to. This is a 27-inch walleye that I caught in Lake Michilimacouse in northern Quebec. I decided to mount it, and I thought, well, I can do a much better job than those people that just put it on a stupid oval plaque, so I put it in a more natural setting. The following pictures are some examples of my Intarsia glass work. These were my sister's two Yorkies, Meg and Joe. They've both gone on to doggy heaven, so that's where I had to send them. The view from a guide boat is about 14 by 18 inches. It's got 384 different pieces of wood in it. This piece is 36 inches by 48 inches. It's the only one I've ever done that I mounted on plywood, but it's because it's so large it almost had to be. It has 540 separate pieces of wood in it of 22 different species. Each color is native to the species. There's no artificial color in it. It took 140 hours to build it.